Welcome back to Dead Good Book Reviews. I'm Judith and you're watching another book review here on the channel. You may recall for about 6 months or so between 2020 and 2021, that wasn't a single video I got through without mentioning The Bone Shard Daughter by Andrea Stewart. Not a single one. So it felt like it would be a travesty to not also review Bone Shard Emperor. It's finally time. Some quick disclaimers before we start. I was sent a free copy of this book by the publisher Orbit in order to review it for you. Nobody's paying me to talk about books. All opinions are my own. I did also have a digital review copy, which is how I've read this before this came in the post. If you're tracking things through Twitter, it all makes sense, trust me. I am going to keep this as spoiler-free as humanly possible for book 2, but if you haven't read book 1 yet, you might be spoiled for that. So go back, watch my review video for book 1, read book 1, come back and watch this review, and then go and read book 2, unless you want to go in knowing absolutely nothing, in which case don't watch a review video for this. Bone Shard Daughter originally came out in September of 2020, and when I say I have been anticipating the release of book 2 since the moment I read it, I am not exaggerating. Bone Shard Emperor comes out on November the 25th, which, if my schedules are correct, is today for you, so you can go down an audio copy. If you live near a bookshop, you could be reading this in less than an hour. This is an adult fantasy series that I believe is due to be a trilogy, with the third book, Bone Shard War, publishing sometime next year. Andrea Stewart is a Chinese-American author based in California at the moment. I will link her website below where you can find out more. Before we go into the plot summary of this one, firstly, obviously, a repeat of the spoiler warning for book 1. If you haven't read book 1, don't keep listening. But also I thought it would be fun to, before I read this book, film a little clip of what I was expecting book 2 to be when I hadn't read any of the blurb for it yet and I hadn't read it yet. So I'm going to send you time travelling for just a moment to talk to Judith from the past. Ooh. I don't know if I'm going to use this or not. I don't know. I have no idea. But where has it gone? It's all the way down here. I should have gone out first. Well, it only took mildly destroying my backdrop to do it. Bone Shard Daughter. I am reading Bone Shard Emperor this week, and I'm super excited about it, and I thought I would just stop in to do a Judith from the past before reading it kind of check-in to go into the review. So I did a reread of Bone Shard Daughter last week, and I loved it the second time around. This is a really strong book. Did I have the same totally intense reaction that I had a year ago? No, interestingly. Which leads me to believe that a lot of the good parts of this are the reveals, and when you know they're coming, potentially less strong, I don't know. Or my mental health's not as good. More likely, slightly more likely. But I did have a good time reading this, and I'm very excited for the second book. What are my predictions for the second book? I think that I really don't know. I really don't have any idea. I hope that we get into some more of why the islands are sinking. That's one hope. I hope that we get to see what kind of magic there is if we're not dealing with bone shards. And I'll be very interested to see if anyone else can use bone shard magic. Basically, spoiler alert, end of book 1. We really got to the point where we thought bone magic probably very bad. Killing people, not really having their consent to do so. How are we going to make this magic system, which was one of the most interesting things about the first book, work then in book 2? I'm really interested to see how that pans out, and whether Lynn has a romance. That's what I want to know. I'm not fussed either way, but I would like to know. So I'm going to throw things back to post having read it, Judith, who's doing a review. Thanks so much for your time. I should have filmed me going ooh in the future, and then we could have matched up. Never mind. Thanks so much, Judith from the past. Now I, Judith from the future, which for you is still the past, I'm going to read you the blurb. In an empire ruled by bone shard magic, the new emperor finally sits on her hard-earned throne, but dangers still lie ahead and enemies hide at every turn. Lin Sukai now rules the Phoenix Empire, but her struggles are only just beginning. Her people don't trust her, her political alliances are weak, and in the northeast of the empire, a rebel army of constructs is gathering, its leader determined to take the throne by force. Yet a greater threat looms on the horizon, for the Alanga, the powerful magicians of legend, have returned. Lin may need their help to defeat the rebels and restore order, but can she trust them? The Bone Shard Emperor is the second book in the Drowning Empire series, an unmissable tale of magic, revolution and mystery where one woman's sense of identity will make or break an empire. Pow. So, this is a continuation on from the events of book 1. I think there is a little bit of a time jump, not a huge amount of one. Mostly we are just dealing with the direct consequences of the end of book 1. I was a bit concerned going into this book that there wouldn't be enough conflict to go on because book 1 ends and a lot of the big problems have been dealt with. Having read this, you do realise that there are far more problems, and one of the things I really like is this book really takes what happens after what it would be the end of many other trilogies of, we've defeated the bad emperor, I am the empress now, what do I do? And really takes that idea and rolls with it and says, what are the problems? How do we get alliances again? Will people in this kind of empire that has been being ruled by a very specific kind of control work if you don't have that kind of control? And that's very interesting. If you were worried that book 1 solved all the problems, don't worry, there are more problems. If anything, additional problems have been created. I also worried that a lot of the mystery had gone out of this series, because obviously book 1 has some revelations towards the end of it, which, as you have read it, you will know. And I was concerned that it would feel very just like, okay, now we've solved all those problems, let's keep gunning towards the end. And that's not something I enjoy. But actually, there are heaps more mysteries to be solved in this series that I hadn't really thought about, and one thing Andrea Stewart does really well, I think, is making you not realise those things are so significant until the moment that they are, and the characters decide they're significant, which makes it for really enjoyable reading, because in book 1 you're not sat there going like, well, why aren't you explaining this to me? What are you doing? But in book 2 you go, oh, okay, it's time to delve into this, and I can't talk about what this is because it might spoil it for you, and also you might feel completely differently and you could have spent the whole of book 1 wondering why she wasn't delving into this. But for me personally, I found that the mysteries came up in a really good sequence. Those who particularly enjoyed the Bone Shard Daughter because of animal companions, Mephi, will not be disappointed in this book. There is much more Mephi, there is Thorana, there's lots of animal companionship. It made me very, very, very happy, and I still really ought to create a list of all the books that have good animal companions in them. I haven't got around to it yet. I will, though. In some ways, this could have been a very predictable book, because the essence of the problem is Lynn needs to regain control in some way, shape or form. Or does she, I suppose, is the question. And in a lot of ways that could be incredibly predictable. That could be something that you could go, all right, bam, 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 here are the story beats, let's go, show me how it works. And I think Andrea Stewart manages to capture a lot more twists and turns in the story than I was expecting. I think that the way she's plotted the book makes that very powerful, and I think also stepping back a bit from some of the perspectives we got in book 1, or changing the perspectives we got in book 1 to be focused on something slightly different, makes that work very well. And as I say, the fact that stuff was dealt with in book 1, but actually we didn't solve why things were happening that way in book 1, makes a very interesting reading. So yeah, I had my concerns about the fact that there wasn't necessarily going to be as much, if any, bone shard magic in this book, because obviously at the end of book 1, we've really realised that maybe killing people by taking the bones out of their heads and using them in constructs until they die is maybe not the most friendly thing. I was very impressed by how it managed to still happen in ways, and how it was still a part of the plot. I think it is less mechanical than it was in book 1, and there's less kind of how does this actually work, which was one of the things I found very interesting about book 1, so I was sad to miss it, but there's enough other magical stuff going on that I was okay with it. It does feel very different in tone to book 1, or I say very different, quite different, I would say, in the British way of saying quite. It's not American like, oh, it's quite lovely. That's a very different thing for me. Bone Shard Daughter is very much a spies and subterfuge kind of plot, whereas Bone Shard Emperor has more action in it. There's still a heck of a lot of backstabbing and double-crossing and having to smuggle information across lines and all of this stuff, but the overall conclusion felt much less spy-y and a lot more action-y. That might be something that's a selling point for you. I just thought it was something to note, and I'll be interested to see where book 3 lands. My guess is it's going to push even more into action, because at a certain point you can't keep spying on each other, you've just got to start attacking each other, don't you? It's not a lesson for life. This isn't necessarily a con. There is more romance in this book than in book 1, for pretty obvious reasons. If you've read book 1, you'll know why there wasn't romance happening at that point. I don't know how I feel about it yet. I think it will depend how book 3 goes. Sort of my feelings on romance in general is I'm never like, this is the most important thing for a story for me, unless it's a romance book. I don't think it intrudes on the main story. I think it is a nice thing. I didn't necessarily on this first reading feel the chemistry in a way I think I was supposed to, but I feel like that's the kind of thing that will come through a reread. Yeah, I'll be interested to see how it plays out in book 3. I'm currently at the point where I wouldn't mind if it worked out, and I wouldn't mind if it didn't work out. I'm sort of blah about the romance, which, to be honest, in a story like this where the romance is not the focus, that's a perfectly fine thing to be. But I thought I would mention it in case romance makes or breaks a book for you. I think this book was a bit harder to get into than Bone Shard Daughter, and I think that's because of the typical fantasy trilogy thing that we talked about in my Girls of Fate and Fury vlog, of book 1 had a very tight setting and book 2 was much broader. And that's true of this as well, and I think that there's a lot less intrigue at the start of book 1 because we kind of know a bit more about what's happening. So bear that in mind as well. You might just want to give yourself a bit more space to get into it, or do as I did and do a reread of Bone Shard Daughter to go straight into Bone Shard Emperor, because it's fun to keep reading these things, honestly. Do I think a reread is essential? The trouble is, I loved rereading it so much, so of course I'm going to say it is. I think you could get by if you were really stuck for time, like you have minutes left in this world, you could probably just start Bone Shard Emperor. But why would you do yourself a disservice and not read Bone Shard Daughter? I don't know. Some comparisons, some other things you might want to read. I'm very wary of recommending this series against anything else, because I think for some people it means very different things, and I don't want to imply, if this is your favourite series, that this will fill that same gap, but also it is sailing around on boats and family loyalty and various other things. Robin Hobb's Live Ships trilogy, just a little bit, just a tiny, tiny sliver of similarity. Boats, there's boat stuff going on, there's the ethics of using materials happening, just the tiniest bit, don't come for me, the tiniest bit. More similarly, the Tide Child series by R.J. Barker. This is the second book in the series, the first one is downstairs, but that starts with the bone ships. That is a bit more character driven, I think, in a way, but has similar sailing around, much more similar to book 2 than to book 1, but has a lot of the loyalty versus backstabbing kind of stuff in it. Some YA picks, because I do think that there is a bit of crossover appeal with these. These are adult fantasy, but you could read this and enjoy it if you like YA. The Isles of Storm and Sorrow series by Bex Hogan. I've recently finished these. There is an overbooked video coming in a few weeks. This is a series about a girl who grows up the daughter of the Viper, the kind of menacing, he's not a pirate captain, but he kind of is, but he works for the king. He's a very bad man, and I think in terms of the escaping your father's legacy stuff, this has some similarity, also involves boats. And for the gaining the loyalty of your people and the idea of exploring what it is to hold power and what governance should look like. The State of Sorrow duology by Melinda Salisbury is another YA series that I think does that really well. This is a bit more traditional fantasy-esque setting, but it is very good fun, and I should reread this at some point because I really enjoy them. Overall, I don't think I had my mind blown as much by this book as I did by book 1, and I think that's partly to do with how book 1 is set up to reveal information that then in book 2 you just already know. That being said, I had a really good time reading it, and in terms of second books in a series, this is definitely a hit. I very, very much enjoyed going back into this world, and now I'll just go back into my state of waiting for the next book in the Drowning Empire series. I'm just waiting. Wait with me. We'll be here. Have you read this? Do you have plans to? Come chat to me about it. I would love to hear your thoughts. Are there any other books that you think are similar? Anything interesting? What are your favourite magic systems? Plonk them down in the comments below. I would love to hear. While you're down there commenting, if you haven't already, please do subscribe. We've got lots of lovely content coming your way. You can also follow me on social media. Come hang out on Discord where you have a wonderful time talking about books. That's all from me, and I will see you in the next one. Also, I wore my bone shirt that is a old Halloween shirt from Primark from like 8 years ago because bones. There's gonna be some bloopers now. We can get interrupted by a dog that whole video. It's very impressive. Review copy. Just gonna leave that bit out. Linsukai now rules. Linsukai now real. Why can't my teeth talk today?